Welcome, adventurers, to another enchanting episode of Lore Drop. I'm Dungeon Master Eguile.
And I'm D&D Wife, your guides to the hidden depths of the world of Extrayus.
Tonight, we unravel the secrets that lie beneath the surface of our Homebrew campaign. We'll dive into the lore, the legends, and the magic that makes Extrayus so captivating.
We'll explore the stories behind the realms, the characters, and the world building that brings our adventures to life.
Whether you're a dungeon master seeking inspiration, a writer crafting your own fantasy worlds, or just a fan of immersive storytelling,
there's something here for you. Join us as we reveal the mysteries of Extrayus and share our creative journey with you.
Get ready for a new Lore Drop, where imagination meets creation. Let's embark on this magical adventure together. Welcome, adventurers, to another episode of Lore Drop. I'm Dungeon Master Eguile, your guide to the mysteries and magic of our homebrew world of Extrayus.
And I'm D&D Wife, the writer who loves to dive deep into the lore behind our campaign. Whether you're a seasoned player, a curious world builder, or just here for the epic tales, we're thrilled to have you with us.
Tonight, we're continuing our deep dive into the magical systems that shape Extrayus. We've explored chaotic forces from daemon and fey magic, but tonight, we're taking a step back from the wild and unpredictable kind of magics to explore something a little bit more calculated. Order magic.
That's right. Order magic is the system administration of Extrayus, the invisible force that keeps the world balanced, the rules in check, and the chaos at bay. If you ever wondered how life and death, good and evil, or even the balance of magic itself stays in harmony, tonight's episode's for you.
So we'll be discussing the creation process of order magic, how it functions as a backbone of our world, and its profound impact that it has on everything from the laws of nature all the way to arcane arts. Trust me, this is the deep dive you don't want to miss.
So grab your spell book, settle in, and let's unravel the logic behind the magic. And don't forget, if you enjoy our podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, and join on Discord to keep the conversation going.
All right, so let's get into it. So obviously, we always kind of, we've gone over a lot of the magics. We've always kind of had like a principal inspiration. And I think order was kind of the one that I kind of latched onto first as the DM, because obviously to me, the DM represents order of the table. So for me, though, I think the best part of what we were talking about when we were originally brainstorming what order was the idea of like isekai anime.
Yeah.
Right? So like, if you don't know, which I doubt if you listen to this kind of a podcast or any kind of D&D things that you don't know what isekai anime is, but it's this kind of escape from the world into a different place. But the facet that we latched onto is that whole like system administrator kind of system, right?
That voice you hear when you level up.
Right, that kind of like controls the world. It's kind of the you know, invisible hand shaping the main characters and kind of make sure that like the OP character doesn't go like too OP.
Right. Still trying to keep the balance.
Right, and we love anime like, you know, like Rising of the Shield Hero, Solo Leveling, Sword Art Online, all of these ones that have kind of these like rule systems that control and balance, and you know, even if it's so crazy, you can count on the balance and the order to be maintained because there's this like AI, this deity, this system in check. And I always kind of liked that and kind of figure it almost every kind of magical world, there kind of has to be something like that.
Yeah.
Right? You just don't create a world and just think that there's not some sort of force that's kind of trying to keep it in balance.
Whether it's the being that created the world doing the checking or some sort of force involved, there always has to be a balance. I mean, we see that even in our own world with the laws of physics and things like that.
Yeah, and the big difference too is obviously, as we've been going over the other kind of magics that are in the same ring as order, those magics are really based on things like emotion and imagination and all these kind of whimsical abstract things. We needed one of the magics to be much more logical, much more kind of succinct and you know, kind of doesn't move, right? Yeah, stays
practical.
put, has no kind of bend to it, because it needed to balance out all the chaos that we had created before it.
It's the rules and it's the administrator of the rules. So if you break them, you could find yourself in some serious trouble.
Oh, yeah. And so, like, you know, so it was always kind of that idea of, like, how do we integrate that into the world? How do we allow that to be something that is both not so limiting that you're like, oh, okay, well, you can't do that. Well, order magic stops that.
Right.
You know, because obviously in some of those animes we talked about, that can be something that actually holds back the player. So we wanted it to be more of a neutral force.
Yeah, we didn't want it to take sides, so it's not necessarily, something with motivations or a personality that thinks in that sort of way and is self-serving. It's rather a force. It's a foundational force that governs the rules of existence in Extrayus, everything that the world stands for, and it makes sure that everything that is within that world follows those rules.
Yeah, and I think a big also difference that we wanted to give is that this isn't something that's like directly manipulated. Where in a lot of the anime or the isekai, it's like, you know, someone's got the master override. Right, someone's got the master override code. And so it's like, you know, you can use those at some points. This is something where it is more of just this kind of universal truth. It's like how we in our own world would dictate the laws of gravity, the laws of, you know, how, you know, the sun or the sun is the center of the universe or the center of the system, and we rotate around it, and all these factors. It's kind of that explanation in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Right, and I think you kind of have
to have... As best as we can describe that, yeah.
Right, like, it's a hard one to do, but, you know, for me, it's I really needed to have a balance.
There has to be. With all the craziness that magic can do and bring.
Yeah, I've always been like kind of proponent, you know, where, you know, at my tables, character deaths can happen because I believe that there is something that's gained through death, growth, or, you know, development. So, you know, you always kind of want to have something like that, but... You know, it's D&D, it's fantasy, it's games. So you always have to prepare because there's always going to be either players or enemies that want to like push the scale really hard, right? Yeah. So anytime you create something where it's like, oh, well, this is the system that has a scale, a balance. I think a lot of players kind of instinctively go like, oh, well, how is that scale going to be tipped?
Yeah, how can we?
Right, so introducing something that's just straight order was always going to be kind of a challenge in how we set that up.
It's tough.
But the big thing, too, was, you know, when I also set it up, we needed another kind of, like, foundation to Extrayus. So as we talked in the very beginning when we spoke about void magic, right, this being kind of the universal survival instinct of the planet itself, you can look at that as almost being kind of connected in a way to order, in that whereas the void is more of the individual and focuses on an individual's creature's ability to adapt and survive and grow, order looks at a much more macro scale. Yeah. You know, it's going to focus more on the universe. It's I think a lot of ways can be conscribed to, I think a lot of like the DC characters and their gods and like their cosmic entity that become where they're like, oh, your planet is so finite in the grand scheme of things, so if you are even a blip of trouble, we'll just wipe you out. Yeah. Right, because order kind of goes, you know, what are you in the grand scheme of the universe?
Right, that is true. And order is one of the magics that we have, is the only magic that I see for now really that affects the entire universe, not just the world of Extrayus.
Yeah, and so I think that's also one where there's this kind of idea where it becomes a safety net, right? It's kind of that thought of, oh, well, okay, cool, there's a whole system of order in Extrayus, and that's going to keep the balance. Yeah, but in essence, the balance goes both ways. Too much good can also lead you to a point. I mean, one of the major points we play a lot of Final Fantasy XIV, and one of the aspects of their second recent expansion was what happens when good wins too much, and how that actually overflooded their world in good.
And created a world that looked beautiful but was still very terrible,
right? And had just absolute, you know, you trip someone on accident, execution, because it was perfectly good. You know, so it makes for a really interesting idea of that there is this kind of global scale or universal scale, actually, that is kind of going back and forth depending on the player's actions, depending on the NPC's actions, that you could very well tip in a way that the players could have thought was nothing and ended up, you know, teetering on to the edge of extinction.
A little bit, right? We do have to think about the consequences of our actions in this world, not just for our own lives' sake as characters, but for what it means for the world as well.
Yeah, and so really it was also the idea because we had created from the three others with demonic, chaos, and fae. Obviously, there needed to be something that kind of kept those in check because as we had explained when we first introduced those magics, they are the ones that are kind of trying to consume Extrayus.
Yeah.
So order is essentially the force that is keeping all of these kind of magical alignments from kind of consuming or crashing into one another.
Yep.
And is essentially the kind of strings to the array itself. They all the kind of rings that connect the magics are all originating from order.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so order is creating the kind of perfect net to keep them oh so aligned enough around Extrayus's core to not implode or explode around it.
So in the beginning, there was order and there was void.
And they kind of and when they wrapped around each other, that kind of is what started everything growing and changing and moving and evolving.
That's cool.
Right. And
so
obviously, we have a lot of background. That was kind of the thoughts. But then integrating into like a TTRPG or trying to explain how order magic was going to be kind of another issue.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because the big principal idea to switch when it comes to order magic is that it's not magic per se as much as it's a system. And so because of that, it's not something that characters are just going to tap in directly. It's
not necessarily.
It's not like, oh, I cast arcane magic. It's not like someone goes, oh, I cast order magic. Now all the Duplos are evenly sorted and collected and everything is equally balanced.
Right.
I get that there are characters with balancing mechanics and spells and stuff, but really it's more of a system that's kind of playing behind the scenes of the fourth wall of the game and the world. And it's that kind of explanation rather than just being like, it just happens this way. Life goes dead and dead goes life, and that's how no, it's because there is a system running in the background, making sure things are taken care of. It's kind of that invisible hand that is taking care of not only the economy, but also the player's stats and their strengths and making sure stuff doesn't get too out of hand.
Right.
But I always think it's funny because in essence, it's always the representation that the players are kind of always the tipping point, right? Because essentially if nothing happens, order just maintains everything, homeostasis, everything will be perfect.
Hunky-dory.
But it's kind of players and their actions that start to tip, and your goal usually is now to try to both look at it both on one and the other. If you're always doing something for, say, the righteous, well, you're going to tip too far one way and the other, and order's going to do whatever it takes to balance the scales back out.
Yeah, this is why I always love playing neutral characters.
Because like order is also like it's kind of what controls the fundamental processes, right? Such as like the life and death cycle, population dynamics, the balances of moral forces, and it's really just so that way everything stays equal. Obviously good, bad people, however you feel that exists, this is what creates that there's not just a ton of Mother Teresa's, and there's also not a ton of Vlad the Impalers. And it's more of a mixture so that it can't be just this oversaturated evil world.
Like sure, there can be one, but where there's one, there's also another kind of stemming that tide.
And a lot of that stems from my personal belief. Every time you see something horrible, well, it's because you don't see something good that somebody was doing to balance that out. Karma, essentially.
And the same thing the other way. When you see something amazing, you do kind of don't see that there are some horrible things going on
around it. Exactly. And so that's what kind of the essence of order is. And it really is making sure that nothing, is dominant. And I like it too, because the idea is that means as players create characters, the world adjusts specifically to counter those characters, which kind of always explains how, like, in a RPG setting, there ends up becoming like a group where it's like, oh man, all these like mercenaries that all have like the counter to all our abilities and spells because the DM just really wants to challenge us and is mad. It's that explaining as to why did that happen. It's because
why are
balance.
There people
so
that
if you're really good at fire, this cryomancer suddenly doesn't like you, and they're really good at ice. Your only weakness,
your rival,
right? And so it's kind of that way of explaining how the DM kind of has to switch things around, make things kind of work. But another unique,
good explanation,
right? And another unique thing, and this affects you as a player, and you had to kind of run into this a little bit, is that as we said in one of the very first lore drops in the creation story, is that in early, arcane magic was allowed to run willy-nilly. There were no requirements. You could just think it, cast it, happen.
Nobody had abused it yet.
Everyone was almost like a sorcerer, essentially. Magic was so plentiful. Well, because of all that chaos and because of everything that happened due to the elves pushing arcane to the almost limit, it forced order to kick in. And in doing so, order essentially dictated into arcane the requirement system, the material verbal system, the component system, the somatic, all the material costs, the movements, the words, to kind of control now how much arcane magic.
You can't just wave a hand and make something happen.
Exactly. It was too much. It was throwing the balance off. So now when you attempt to cast Fireball, because order is also something of humor, the whole joke of like bat guano, so it lights on fire, those still play into the story. They're still humorous. I love that part of like, certain factors of D&D. They can still be there because order is the one dictating that you at least go out of your way to do something extra to balance the usage.
So sure, it might not be something that's worth a lot, but because it fulfills the requirement, you can still use it.
Yeah, and then because of that aspect, it also is kind of the ultimate safety to the planet itself. Like, obviously, like we were just discussing and you had pointed out, like it was the void and it was order. So obviously they have the biggest connection and reason to stay together. So if something were to push the planet to a very kind of defensive nature, it would have the ability to rise up champions, titans, things to defend itself. I'm a big Final Fantasy VII fan, right? And that was a big part of the story of kind of the world protecting itself through weapons that would spawn from the planet. And so that idea is kind of played into like, how would the planet defend itself? And if you're really a flea in the grand scheme of it, they're not
swept away.
Yeah, something may be created or forced to be used that could essentially destroy not only just like the people, but maybe potentially the planet for a little bit.
Yeah, or at least like the surface of it.
Right, I was gonna say like the life on the planet.
Yeah. I totally get that.
But really, the real mechanical speaking is that it really is kind of that justification for like the DM's involvement. And that's kind of where I like to, you're a DM and every now and then you like to have a little bit of ways to explain kind of why it's because I said so. It's like, well, I'm the system administrator. So it really allows me to always kind of say, why there are updates to the world, right? So say we happen to have a character that's, a weapon is given to them and man, it's so powerful. It's too strong. They're just decimating too many things. It's outshadowing the other players. So now I'm like, okay, well, we're going to have to balance that out a little. We're going to need to make some changes. We're going to lower a little bit of this. We're going to give you a little of that. Now I can be like, well, that was order, kind of making sure it wasn't too powerful.
Right.
It's a little cheesy. I'll take it.
Right.
But I think it makes it really fun as a way to kind of also take a little bit off of my shoulders of like, the world is always going to be balancing itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Much like a game is always balancing itself. So essentially, order provides the patches to Extrayus to keep it running smoothly when we run into different, kind of issues or problems.
Yeah, and there are some games where there are little to no rules, right? And we see absolute chaos.
Yeah, right.
It's completely rampant.
And at the same time, I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's because, no rules. It's more of just you without any kind of rules. You don't even know really what to do or where to go or what's right or what's wrong, or even if there's an impact. If everything is always like, you save a town and they're like, yeah, thanks.
Cool.
And you're not really seeing any kind of change or them growing, or you're going to lose interest.
Yeah, but you come back like 2 weeks later and they've got like a whole market set up. They're rebuilding like that really progresses the story. But the really important parts I think for us as players is really we don't take notice of order and the presence of order magic in our lives until we mess it up.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, and it's kind of a pretty good way to segment into kind of looking at how order affects Extrayus as a whole and its people. Obviously, on like the kind of macro scale, when looking at it, it's very much what kind of has created the kind of current stability of the world, right?
Yeah.
So because we've had the reaping games and these new forces both being created and influencing the world, order's been kind of stretched to its limit, trying to create this new
balances for everything,
right? This new magical array. So it has been using a lot of that resource, a lot of that energy to kind of keep that balance.
Yeah.
So now that we've had a few hundred years of balance and stability, it'll really be kind of interesting to see kind of how that will change as it goes.
Gotcha. So can we think of the rings in the array as a sort of like the limbs of order, reaching out and kind of making sure everything is moving properly?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good way to look at it. I mean, we can even call them like the rings of order, because I really kind of like, I kind of like the sound of that. That was pretty cool. That was made live. That was cool. But yeah, it's really kind of it trying to stretch out, because obviously even in terms of chaos magic, that was made directly through the union of order and the creation magic, right? Celestial. And so because of those two, they created chaos, and then basically Celestial opened up the creation of it, order locked it down. And so without really being known, that also is another effect of order. It created its own new magic to try to balance the kind of instability of both demonic and fae-like magic. So it really became this big thing. But the biggest thing of all is that it's not really known. Now, we speak of it, we're the human beings who made the world.
Right.
But within the world of Extrayus, order magic doesn't exist in people's minds, records, history books. There is no such thing. So that's the real interesting thing with as the world develops technologically, or as our players develop in the world and sense different like magical entities. Other than that, no one really knows it exists. It is kind of the invisible force. So there's no way for the current world to really know what's going on,
or to manipulate order in any way.
So no one knows that there's this kind of force. So again, there's no one tapping into this idea of order magic. But with that being said, just because they don't know of its existence doesn't mean that they're not interacting with it at all.
True.
Now, we've seen in certain new kind of areas, new technology being granted. Because of the magical backfiring of arcane magic, others began to look for ways to cast magical spells without using magical spells, right? So you wouldn't have to worry about blowback. And so they developed over time new technologies such as necrotech. Now that's using life forces to circumvent material costs. So kind of, and again, we tap into a lot of things, and we talked about this in other shows, but like Full Metal Alchemist is their Philosopher's Stone,
the equivalent
right?
exchange
Exactly,
sort of
right? So if you're using the life force and you're using this energy, then I don't have to find the materials. I don't have to
provide
components. Spell. I'm like using the greatest energy of all life.
You don't even have to inscribe circles or anything like that.
Right, and so there's this whole country called Undabar, which we've just barely started to tackle in one of our other shows, The Traveler's Chronicles. If you want to check out more of the story specifically. But there are these countries that are developing these technologies that are circumventing that order. So obviously it's not that large yet. It hasn't been spread out to the world, but we could see as these develop and as these resources become more populous,
gain more influence.
It could start to see a little change in how order has to evaluate or control the world. We could see essentially maybe new laws of magic and reaction and the way things happen created during our campaign.
Okay, that would be interesting to see.
And the biggest threat of all, and this is the last of our magical subjects, are the psionics. And the biggest reason is that they are specifically breaking the rules of order. And the reason in that is that they merely wish it or they think it, and not even a being of magic, but they are allowed to create primal sources of energy, right? They can make fire appear out of nowhere just by thinking of fire, but they themselves are not magical creatures. So they actually break the entire system because they are not bound by any of the rules, regulation, and in fact, in our array, psionic is actually this strange ellipse that kind of represents the fact that order can't really get get it into balance. It can't control it.
Nope.
It flies both too far and too obscure for it to actually put it into a perfect circle.
Yep. So it has times of ebb and flow where it's stronger, where it's weaker.
Or where order has more control over it or less.
Exactly.
Which allows psionic individuals to have like great accesses to these surges of power and ability, and as well as it being only temporary, right?
Yep.
So they can't have these long-winded battles, but when they do, they're able to have long, like big surges of energy that just kind of destroy anything in its path, and order isn't able to change anything or control that.
Right.
So that'll be real interesting as we see more of those kind of creatures be born or created, and how that'll actually start tipping the balance. We may start seeing even more magical systems be forced to be made in order to maybe rein in psionics.
Yeah. Maybe more rings.
So it'll be really interesting because obviously our world is super new.
Yeah.
And so with being a new world, a new universe, it's kind of always funny because it's the kind of how will the world discover these new technologies? Yeah. So we do a little bit of time skip. So we don't really move too far ahead at this, as our system is more of a day by day. But it's going to be really interesting to see how the players as well as the NPCs. So it could be something where this whole campaign can go on. There could be a couple years down, but it won't be until we start another campaign where order has been discovered,
and now we know more,
and now it's 800 years in the future from the previous campaign, and it took them that long to discover. So I think this is another one that is going to probably have an update
at some point,
the players, because it's something that is still hasn't been experienced and hasn't been understood. So it really will be kind of interesting to see later on after it's discovered about how it starts to affect now that it's a more active part of the world.
And
when
how
people,
it's evolved.
Right, or people who start to recognize it and maybe down the road find a way to channel that kind of unique source of
power. Or become
power.
scions for control.
Right, so that's
order.
I think it's going to be kind of interesting to see, because this is that one where it had done so much in the background. It was taking care of so many things that it now is taking that chance to kind of recover, right?
Yeah.
Omnipotent beings and creatures and magical forces need their rest too.
Yeah, it's just stretched itself to the limit, so it needs a little bit of me time.
So there's a lot of, I think, individuals thought order magic would be something more of like, where it's just like I cast a spell and things are stacked perfectly, or it's the life and death. It's more of that kind of system administrator, right? We our love for isekai animes, especially the ones where like very MMO system style, really kind of, we wanted that to have a place somewhere in our story, somewhere in our world, and this was, I think, kind of like the coolest way to put it in there.
It was a really good, I think, place to fit it in as an overarching just force in the world that governs it.
Yeah, and when it comes to an RPG or a TTRPG, in this case, it is kind of one of the more easier ones, because essentially it's like, it's the rules.
Yep.
It's like, well, what's order magic? Do you have the player's handbook? It's right in there.
That's order magic.
We have a binder of all our extra rules. Yep. That's more order magic. So really, I guess a real good way is just anything like the DM sets up is that's order magic.
Yep.
So me as the DM, that's the magic I cast. I cast order magic.
Yeah. That's
you roll 3d6s, order magic.
Yep.
But that's really kind of the way we wanted to have an explanation for why these things occur. Why is this happening? Why is there numbers and clickety clackies? Well, this is because this is how order works.
Yeah, that's what determines everything.
And I think it's really cool when building a world and kind of understanding that, well, you will have to make updates. Like, you're going to have to make changes. So we actually built into our world a system to explain, like, oh, why has this got updated? Well, order magic wants to balance it.
Yeah, it has to.
It makes kind of our own dev team to kind of check on things, change things up if we need it. And then again, it is kind of one of those tough ones because the players in the world don't know it exists yet.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's hard to say like how the citizenry are going to experience or eventually maybe
how they view it,
or how they might tap in. But we do know at least that due to some of the kind of newer forms of magic, that they are kind of now pushing their finger on one side of the scale. So over time, we might have our own kind of greenhouse gases moment.
It must be stopped.
Right, and see kind of what's going to happen when the scale actually starts kind of moving and what order will do to keep up with that.
Yeah, that's going to be our biggest test, I think, as players, as adventurers, and as, potential heroes, perhaps, to the world. We really need to think about the consequences of our actions.
And I mean, we're getting close. I mean, I know we've been talking about the magic of Extrayus, what feels like months now, and it's just because there's so much to go into.
Yeah.
We only have 2 left at this point.
Just 2.
We have Arcane, which is what we'll be taking a look at next, which will be kind of looking at all the different kind of breakdowns of that and being kind of the lowest form of magic of Extrayus. And before we finish off, finally talking about Scions.
Yeah.
So that's going to be really cool and really something to look forward to. But that's really it for today, for today's deep dive into the world of Order magic, where balance holds chaos at bay.
We hope you enjoyed exploring how this unseen force shapes Extrayus and keeps the magic in check.
As always, we love to hear your thoughts. Join us on Discord. Keep the discussion going. Ask questions or share your own world-building ideas and tips.
And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for more content and resubscribe to Lore Drop so you don't miss any future episodes.
Thank you for listening and supporting Lore Drop. Until next time, stay curious and keep creating. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Lore Drop. We hope you enjoyed exploring the rich lore and magic of Extrayus with us.
But the adventure doesn't have to end here. Join our Couple of Nerds Discord community to dive deeper into the world of Extrayus, share your own stories, and connect with fellow adventurers.
And don't forget to check out the Couple of Nerds YouTube channel. There you'll find all our content, from thrilling campaign highlights to miniature painting tutorials and more.
We love hearing from you, so be sure to leave your thoughts, questions, and ideas. Who knows, your input might just inspire our next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through Extrayus. Until next time, keep your imagination alive and your dice ready.
Stay curious, stay creative, and may your adventures be ever wondrous.
See you in the next Lore Drop.